Ever get the sense that there's a sort of invisible playbook guiding how we all act, think, and even feel?
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're pulling back the curtain on that playbook. We're taking a deep dive into the fascinating world of human patterns,
Yeah.
those recurring ways we think, feel, behave, and how we organize our lives, big and small.
And to really get a handle on this, we're looking at it from a bunch of different angles. We've drawn from psychology, sociology, anthropology,
Right.
biology, philosophy, and even the insights that, artificial intelligence is starting to offer.
Wow.
And it's a truly interdisciplinary exploration.
Right, because the material we've got here really digs into everything, from the most personal emotions we experience to the huge structures that shape our societies.
Exactly.
Even those really fundamental questions about what makes us human in the first place.
Yeah.
Our goal today is to extract the most crucial insights, the stuff that really sheds light on why we do what we do day in and day out.
And I think you'll be surprised by some of the connections we uncover. We'll be looking at patterns that pop up across almost every culture on the planet. And we'll even see how AI is beginning to not only spot these patterns, but also maybe give us a fresh perspective on them.
Okay, so when we talk about human patterns, what exactly are we referring to? Like, what's the bedrock here?
Well, at the individual level, a useful starting point is what social psychology calls the ABCs: affect, behavior, and cognition.
ABCs.
Yeah, that's your feelings, your actions, and your thoughts. These three working together are the fundamental building blocks of the patterns we see in individuals.
Can you give an example?
Sure, think of it this way. Feeling nervous before speaking in public, that's affect. Practicing your speech beforehand, behavior.
Right.
And rehearsing potential questions in your mind, that's cognition. That's your own ABCs shaping how you approach that situation.
Gotcha. So how do these individual tendencies then scale up to the bigger picture, things like social norms and our traditions?
Well, it's a really interesting back and forth. Our individual ways of thinking, feeling, acting, when they become common across a lot of people, they tend to solidify into social norms, those unspoken rules about how we should behave in groups.
Okay.
Over time, these can even evolve into more formal rituals, those predictable and often symbolic actions that structure our social lives and reinforce what we collectively value.
Like raising your hand in class.
Exactly. Imagine a classroom. The individual act of raising your hand, when followed by everyone, becomes the social norm for polite participation.
Okay. Give me some examples of these patterns that show up everywhere. It's kind of tough to picture something that's truly the same across the globe.
Well, consider storytelling. Across wildly different cultures, you find myths and legends.
Right, like hero stories.
Exactly. While the specific stories vary dramatically, the underlying structures, the hero's journey, the battle between good and evil, are remarkably consistent. This suggests a fundamental way our minds process narrative and conflict. Daily routines are another one. Every society has ways of organizing the day, even if the specifics differ. Rules exist everywhere. Tool use is fundamental. Even kinship terms, how we refer to family, follow surprisingly similar patterns across cultures. And rituals marking everything from birth to marriage to death, they're a constant.
So the fact that these types of things exist is universal, even if the details change.
Precisely. The fact that these broad categories exist almost universally suggests they likely helped our ancestors solve basic survival or, social coordination challenges.
That makes sense. So we're looking at this from a lot of different angles. Our sources included psychology, sociology, anthropology. How does each of those fields approach these patterns?
Yeah, each one offers a unique lens. Psychology really focuses on those individual ABCs we talked about.
Right, the feelings, actions, thoughts.
Yeah, looking at things like our schemas, which are basically your mental shortcuts or frameworks.
Like knowing what to do in a restaurant.
Exactly, that's your restaurant schema. Psychology looks at those, our attitudes, our emotions.
Okay, and sociology.
Sociology examines social norms, the structures of our societies. Behavioral patterns like greetings, relational patterns like family dynamics, organizational patterns like workplace hierarchies, and how we learn to navigate these through socialization.
And anthropology, wider view.
Takes a wider cultural perspective, yeah. Looking for those universal patterns across all human cultures, like storytelling and family structures, and how culture itself shapes our patterns of behavior and belief.
Then biology and genetics.
They delve into our evolutionary predispositions, genetic influences on things like temperament, risk-taking, and the role of our neurobiology, brain structures, neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, influencing mood and motivation, hormones.
So the brain chemistry stuff.
Right. And finally, philosophy grapples with the very concept of human nature, reason, meaning, and those big questions like free will.
Which definitely ties into whether we can change our patterns.
Absolutely. It impacts how we think about our choices and habits.
So these patterns are really fundamental then, not just random individual habits that we happen to pick up.
Absolutely. Their pervasiveness is a key characteristic. We observe them across all genders, all age groups, and every culture studied, and throughout human history.
Wow.
While the specific ways these patterns play out can be incredibly diverse, the underlying human capacities and the tendency to create these recurring ways of thinking, feeling, and acting appear to be universal.
So even if a teenager in Seoul and a retired person in Stockholm have very different daily lives, there are still some fundamental patterns at work underneath.
Precisely. Think about basic human needs. Across time and cultures, humans have consistently needed to survive,
Yeah.
to connect with others, to make sense of their surroundings, and to find some sense of purpose.
The big stuff.
Right. These fundamental needs drive the development of recognizable patterns, like how societies organize themselves or the belief systems they create, even if the specific details look very different.
And what about the old nature versus nurture debate? How does that fit into the universality and the diversity of these patterns?
It's constant interaction. It's never just one or the other.
Yeah.
We see universal human tendencies, like the ability to recognize basic facial expressions of emotion.
Like happiness or sadness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Research suggests people from very different cultures can often identify those. However, each culture also has its own display rules. Unspoken guidelines about when, where, and how it's appropriate to show those emotions.
So you might feel it, but not show it.
You got it. There are even emotional accents. Subtle ways we express emotions that are more easily understood within our own cultural group.
Emotional accents, like a regional dialect for feelings.
Kind of. A slight tightening of the eyes might signal frustration in one culture, but something else entirely in another.
That's fascinating. So a smile might generally indicate happiness, but the intensity or the specific situation might carry different weight depending on where you are.
Exactly. And this interplay continues as we develop. Developmental processes, from the earliest reflexes in infancy.
Like grabbing a finger.
Yeah, like the rooting reflex or grasping, all the way to how we form our sense of identity as teenagers, and how we continue to be socialized throughout our lives, all shape the patterns we develop. The idea of developmental plasticity is crucial here. Our genes give us a certain range of possibilities,
Right.
but our experiences and cultural environment really mold how those possibilities become our individual patterns.
You mentioned variations based on demographics, like gender roles earlier. Those seem pretty specific to different cultures.
They are largely shaped by cultural norms, and they do vary significantly, absolutely.
Right.
But the fundamental human capacity to take on social roles and form relationships, to have certain expectations and behaviors associated with different categories within a society, that seems to be a universal pattern.
Okay, so the ability to have roles is universal, even if the roles themselves differ.
That's a good way to put it. While biological differences might influence some tendencies, the widespread creation of structured social roles is something we see across all demographics.
This is really making me think about things differently. Now, you brought up AI earlier. How can a machine even begin to grasp these incredibly intricate human patterns? It seems like such a leap.
Well, AI, particularly machine learning, takes a fundamentally different approach. It looks at patterns statistically.
Statistically, meaning?
Meaning for an AI, a pattern is essentially a recurring structure or correlation it finds within a large set of data. It's all about identifying what happens repeatedly.
Okay.
This is quite different from our human understanding, which is so rich with context, meaning, and often driven by intention.
Right, we understand the why.
Exactly. It's almost like AI can identify all the grammatical rules of a language, but has no inherent understanding of humor or sarcasm.
Which needs that shared context.
Exactly, that deeply human shared context.
So AI can see the what, but not necessarily the why in the way a human does.
Precisely. A helpful way to think about this is through a framework like Cognilytica's 7 patterns of AI.
7 patterns.
These aren't patterns within AI itself, but rather common ways AI is being used, and many of them directly involve human patterns.
Like what?
Take hyper-personalization when Netflix recommends a show based on what you've watched.
Yeah.
That AI is identifying patterns in your viewing habits. Autonomous systems, like self-driving cars, learn patterns of human driving. Predictive analytics uses past data to forecast things like consumer trends or even disease outbreaks based on patterns in human behavior. Conversational AI learns patterns in our speech. Recognition AI identifies patterns in images or voices. Goal-driven AI learns through interaction. And pattern and anomaly detection flags unusual deviations.
Like fraud detection.
Right, like detecting fraudulent transactions by spotting breaks in normal patterns.
So in a lot of ways, AI is like a really advanced pattern recognition tool. It finds things we might miss.
Exactly. It excels at finding subtle or large-scale patterns in massive amounts of data. However, this is key. It currently lacks genuine comprehension, common sense, the ability to truly understand the meaning, intent, or the surrounding context of those patterns.
It sees correlation, not causation or meaning.
Pretty much. It can identify correlations that two things often happen together, but understanding the causal links or the human narrative behind them is still a significant challenge.
Like knowing why people watch certain shows, not just that they do.
Exactly. Think of weather patterns. An AI can predict a storm based on atmospheric data, but it doesn't understand the feeling of rain on your skin or the human desire for sunshine. It misses the experience.
That's a great way to put it.
And in a fascinating twist, the very fact that we humans are developing AI to recognize these human patterns could be seen as a meta-level human pattern itself.
Using patterns to understand patterns.
Kind of. Our ongoing drive to create tools that help us better understand ourselves and the world around us.
Now let's take a step back. Where did these human patterns even originate? What's the story of how they came to be, way back?
There are several interconnected layers to that story. First, you have the evolutionary roots.
Darwin and all that?
Right. Evolutionary psychology suggests that many of our fundamental behavioral patterns were shaped by natural selection because they increased our ancestors' chances of survival and reproduction.
Like finding food, finding a mate.
Exactly. Caring for offspring, cooperating within social groups, these basic tendencies.
So you're saying that some of our preferences for certain ways of acting might be deeply ingrained in us from our evolutionary past. You mentioned the listener's thought about seeking pain relief and striving for longevity.
Yeah, that intuition aligns perfectly with an evolutionary perspective. The experience of pain is a critical adaptive response.
It tells you something's wrong.
Right, it signals danger, motivates us to avoid harm. Pleasure, on the other hand, often signals things that are beneficial. Good food, strong social bonds. Our brain's reward system, driven by dopamine, reinforces behaviors that were historically advantageous.
And longevity, living longer.
Well, while natural selection acts directly on reproductive success, traits that promote health and longevity can certainly contribute.
How so?
By extending our reproductive years, allowing us to invest more in our offspring, and maybe passing on knowledge across generations.
Interesting. So even some of our modern habits, maybe even the ones that aren't so good for us now, could have had a purpose way back when. You mentioned evolutionary mismatch.
Exactly. The environments we live in today are drastically different from those in which our psychological patterns evolved.
Like our love for sugar.
Perfect example. A strong craving for high-calorie, sugary foods was incredibly beneficial when food was scarce, providing quick energy.
But now, not so much.
Right. Now, in a world of readily available processed food, that same craving can contribute to health problems. It's not that our biology is wrong, but it's operating in a context it wasn't originally adapted for. Understand the mismatch is key.
Okay, so evolution laid some fundamental groundwork. What about our actual biological makeup, our genes and our brains? How much do they dictate?
Our biological blueprint is absolutely crucial. Genetics plays a significant role, predisposing us towards certain traits, abilities, tendencies.
Like being outgoing or maybe anxious?
Aspects of temperament, yes. Even intelligence, susceptibility to certain mental health conditions. But, and this is crucial, it's never a simple case of genes determine everything.
It's interaction, right?
Always. It's the complex interaction between our genes and our environment throughout our entire lives that shapes our actual patterns.
Yeah.
You might inherit a genetic predisposition, but your experiences determine how it plays out.
And what about the inner workings, the chemicals in our brains, the hormones?
They have a profound influence. Neurotransmitters like serotonin, regulating mood, and dopamine, central to motivation and reward, constantly influence how we feel and act, shaping our patterns. Imbalances can significantly alter things.
And hormones?
Hormones exert powerful effects too. Oxytocin, involved in social bonding.
The love hormone.
Sometimes called that, yeah. And cortisol, the stress hormone, influences how we respond to challenges. Even brain architecture matters. The amygdala for emotions, the frontal cortex for decision-making.
Wow.
Variations there contribute to different patterns. Even the coevolution of our vocal cords and language centers in the brain was essential for complex communication patterns.
So nature provides the initial framework, but our experiences and learning fill in so many of the details. How do we actually learn these complex patterns as we grow up?
Socialization and learning are absolutely fundamental. We're not born with a complete set of complex behaviors.
We have to figure it out.
We acquire and refine them throughout our development, always within a cultural context. From the moment we're born, we're constantly learning, internalizing norms, values, beliefs, behavioral patterns from society.
Through family, friends.
School, media, all the institutions we encounter.
And is all of that a conscious process, like being directly taught how to behave? Don't do that?
Not at all. There's both explicit and implicit learning. Explicit is conscious learning, being taught rules, how to ride a bike.
Okay.
But a huge amount happens implicitly. We unconsciously absorb recurring patterns and social norms from our environment without even realizing it.
Like personal space. Nobody teaches you that directly.
Exactly. Or appropriate eye contact. That's how we learn many unwritten rules. It's efficient for passing down culture. But it can also lead to unconsciously adopting biases if we're not aware of what we're absorbing from the environment.
And our early experiences, especially how we're raised, have a lasting impact on shaping these patterns.
Absolutely critical. Parenting styles, for example, profoundly influence our emotional development, self-worth, social skills.
How we handle stress.
Crucially, yes, how we learn to cope with stress and regulate our emotions. Different parenting approaches foster distinct coping mechanisms and emotional regulation capacities that can persist throughout life. And of course, what counts as good parenting varies culturally.
So we're constantly being shaped by our surroundings and the people around us, often without even being fully aware of it.
Precisely. We also develop social intuition. That quick, automatic ability to make assumptions and predictions about others.
Gut feelings about people.
Kind of. It comes from a lifetime of this learning. Our brains constantly pick up subtle cues, make predictions essential for navigating social complexity. And that kind of nuanced understanding is what AI still finds incredibly hard to replicate.
It sounds like culture is the ultimate weaver of these patterns, taking our basic human toolkit and creating this incredible tapestry of diversity.
Culture is an extraordinarily powerful shaping force.
Yes.
It provides the context, the content, the constraints for how our innate predispositions get expressed.
Like the rules of the game.
Sort of. It's the accumulated knowledge, beliefs, norms, customs, values passed down through generations. Biology provides the template. Culture weaves these incredibly diverse and intricate designs upon it.
You mentioned this idea of universal themes with diverse cultural expressions. Can you give me a few more examples of that in action?
Think again about emotional expression. Basic emotions seem universally recognizable.
Right.
But the specific rules about when, where, and how to express them differ dramatically. Some cultures encourage open grief, others value reserve.
Okay. What else?
Moral understanding. The basic capacity to recognize harm might be universal, but which moral values different cultures prioritize can lead to very different judgments. Loyalty might mean one thing here, another there. Rituals are another great example, present everywhere. Marking transitions, reinforcing values.
But weddings look different everywhere.
Exactly. The forms and meanings are incredibly diverse. And social structures, family structures, economic systems, governance, every society organizes itself. But the patterns vary enormously.
So culture is like a huge pattern library we inherit.
That's a great way to think about it. And the concept of gene-culture coevolution suggests our biology and culture have actually influenced each other over evolutionary time.
Wow. This is all so interconnected. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Now, let's look at how these patterns actually manifest in our lives. What are some of the key ways they show up?
Well, one of the most obvious ways is through our emotional lives, our emotional palette.
Laughter, tears, anger.
Exactly. Those seem to be universal signals, but as we've discussed, their expression has cultural dialects.
Right. And you mentioned earlier about emotions being done on purpose. How does that work?
It's a fascinating question. While the initial feeling might be automatic, the way we then express that emotion, especially socially, often involves some intention.
We choose how to react.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
Guided by our social goals and those cultural display rules. You might feel genuinely frustrated, but you consciously choose to express it calmly in a professional setting.
To keep your job.
For instance, So we have these underlying feelings, but we learn how and when to show them based on context and culture. And different psychological theories try to explain this interplay. Ultimately, emotions communicate, motivate, and help coordinate socially.
And what about how we think? How do our thinking patterns manifest?
Our cognitive architectures, schemas, attitudes, belief systems are how we organize information, make sense of the world.
Mental frameworks.
Right. They help us process information quickly. Your schema for friend includes expectations about behavior. They're efficient.
Fine.
But they can also lead to biases if they're based on incomplete or faulty information. Belief systems, those broader sets of beliefs, give us overarching frameworks for meaning.
And you mentioned superior pattern processing.
Yes, humans have this remarkable capacity for SPP. It enables abstract thought, creativity, but it can also lead us to see patterns where none exist or cling to wrong beliefs.
Seeing faces in clouds.
That kind of thing, yes. Or more complex, incorrect belief systems, which highlights the importance of cognitive liberty, the autonomy to control our own thoughts.
So our brains are constantly trying to find patterns, even if sometimes those patterns are just in our heads.
Exactly. That drive for pattern recognition is fundamental to making sense of a complex world.
Okay, so emotions, thoughts, what about our actual behavior, what we do?
Our individual behavioral patterns, shaped by those ABCs in our biology, aggregate into complex social interactions through social learning.
How we act in groups.
Yeah. Behavioral game theory looks at how fairness and reciprocity influence decisions.
Like the ultimatum game.
Right. Studies using that show our strong aversion to unfairness, even if it costs us. Complexity theory helps understand how large-scale patterns emerge from individual actions, like social trends spreading.
Like viral videos.
Could be an example. Sociology categorizes social patterns, behavior like routines, relational like friendships, structural like institutions, and rituals, again, are structured behaviors with deep meaning.
It's like a massive ongoing improvisation, but with certain underlying scripts or tendencies that we often fall back on.
A very fitting description. And when you zoom out even further, these patterns lead us to some really profound philosophical inquiries.
Like what kinds of big questions does philosophy ask about all this patterning?
Well, philosophers have long pondered human nature itself. Are we rational? Social? Modern views emphasize our variability. Then there's the quest for purpose and meaning in life versus the meaning of life, evolutionary perspectives versus positive psychology's focus on constructing meaning.
And free will again.
Absolutely. The free will versus determinism debate is central. If our patterns are determined, can we change them? Systems theory offers a broader view of life as an interconnected pattern.
And do these human patterns intersect with more abstract fields like math or physics? Seems unlikely.
Interestingly, yes. Math is the study of patterns. Mathematical sociology uses models to analyze social dynamics. Even classical physics was deterministic, modern physics less so. But frameworks like systems theory and complexity theory act as meta-frameworks, revealing shared principles across disciplines.
Like that edge of chaos idea.
Exactly, as a potential sweet spot for adaptive systems, including human societies.
So these patterns aren't just random quirks, they seem deeply embedded. But what's the impact? Are they always beneficial?
Not necessarily. They have a dual nature. They profoundly shape our individual lives, perception of time, choices, resilience, well-being.
How we cope with things.
Exactly. Habitual thought patterns affect how we experience time or handle stress, and that desire to feel good all the time. It's understandable, but maybe unrealistic. Negative emotions have functions.
So managing emotions is better than suppressing them.
Generally, yes. Developing emotional regulation skills is key. And crucially, patterns can become outdated or maladaptive. We need the ability to assess and revise them.
What worked before might not work now.
Precisely. And at the societal level, shared patterns create social order, predictability. But shifts in patterns also drive social change.
Like the Industrial Revolution or civil rights movements.
Good examples. Cooperation and altruism are built on patterns, but so is conflict. In-group loyalty can flip into prejudice.
Right.
Social institutions embody and perpetuate patterns. And socioeconomic stratification is a powerful structural pattern affecting life chances, self-perceptions, even cognitive styles.
You raised a really important but difficult point earlier about acts of cruelty and violence. How do these terrible actions relate to human patterns? It often feels like those who commit such acts are completely breaking all pro-social patterns.
That's a deeply important question. It's natural to think of them as outside typical patterns, but You could see them as the extreme negative end of a spectrum,
How so?
arising from a complex interplay of psychological vulnerabilities, neurological factors, social influences, situational contexts that override empathy.
Things like trauma or brain differences.
Factors like inadequate nurturing, trauma, certain neurological conditions, negative peers, exposure to violence can contribute. A key factor is often a deficit in empathy, especially effective empathy, feeling what others feel.
So it's not just deciding to be cruel.
Often, yes, there are deeper factors. In severe cases like psychopathy, neurological differences are associated with this lack of empathy. And crucially, large-scale cruelty isn't just isolated individuals.
It can be group behavior.
It can emerge from distorted in-group loyalty and obedience, especially under perceived threat, facilitated by institutions and the cognitive pattern of dehumanizing the other group.
Making it easier to inflict harm.
Yes. So it might seem like they don't care about human patterns, but it could be more accurate to say they're intensely focused on a destructive, exclusionary set of patterns, prioritizing their in-group to the detriment of others.
That's a sobering thought. Not an absence of pattern, but a focus on a very dark set. What about our sense of right and wrong? How do we develop our moral compass?
Societies develop moral norms and justice systems to regulate behavior, promote cohesion. Theories like moral foundations theory suggest innate moral intuitions.
But cultures emphasize different ones.
Exactly, leading to diverse moral patterns and disagreements. Behavioral ethics explores why good people sometimes act unethically, often due to environment and cognitive biases.
And philosophy.
Philosophical ethics offers frameworks, deontology, rules, duties, utilitarianism, consequences. Ultimately, our ethical patterns likely arise from evolved intuitions, cultural norms, and individual reasoning and empathy. A mix.
So our moral compass is also this constantly evolving interplay. Now let's get back to AI. You mentioned it's increasingly able to recognize human patterns. What does that mean for our understanding of ourselves?
Well, as we said, AI's understanding is primarily statistical. Those 7 patterns of AI show how it intersects with our behavior learning preferences, actions, language, identifying us, detecting anomalies.
But still based on data patterns, not deep understanding.
Right. Crucially, it relies on the quality and potential biases in the training data. It's missing that rich layer of human context and motivation.
So AI can tell us what we tend to do, but not really why in a human sense.
Precisely. However, even with these limits, AI, especially NLP and machine learning, can significantly enhance our own understanding.
How?
It can process vast data, social media, text, etc., to detect subtle linguistic patterns, complex correlations invisible to us.
Like shifts in language use indicating psychological changes.
Exactly. Or tracking patterns over time, potentially identifying early signs of loneliness or depression from linguistic cues. AI is being explored in mental health for diagnosis, monitoring, prediction.
Like a giant cognitive mirror.
You could think of it that way.
Yeah.
Reflecting patterns back to us on a massive scale, potentially leading to more data-driven understanding. It could create a valuable feedback loop between AI insights and social science.
That's a fascinating idea, AI as a large-scale microscope for human behavior. But you also mentioned this common sense gap. What are the real limitations we need to keep in mind?
The common sense gap remains a huge hurdle. AI lacks that intuitive, context-rich understanding from lived experience.
Statistical versus semantic understanding.
Right. It struggles with ambiguity, situations outside its training data, making plausible inferences a child could make.
Like knowing a dropped glass will break.
Classic examples like that, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Or that you can't be in 2 places at once. It lacks embodied cognition, the link between our physical bodies and our understanding. Imagine a human born, unable to recognize human patterns. They'd be severely impaired socially. That kind of parallels AI's current limits.
It's like AI can analyze the individual notes, but misses the melody or the feeling.
Exactly. And this gap leads to significant ethical considerations as AI gets better at recognizing and predicting our patterns.
What are the key ethical issues we need to be thinking about here?
Privacy is huge, given the data AI needs. Algorithmic bias is another major issue.
AI inheriting our biases.
Yes, and potentially amplifying them, leading to unfair outcomes. Then there's the impact on autonomy, cognitive liberty, the risk of subtle manipulation of choices and beliefs.
Because it understands our vulnerabilities.
Potentially. And of course, misuse, surveillance, disinformation, specific applications like AI and mental health or those grief bots.
Right, mimicking deceased people.
They raise complex questions about data security, emotional harm, the nature of grief itself. We need careful consideration, regulation, public discussion to navigate this responsibly.
Grief bots. That's really thought-provoking and, yeah, potentially unsettling. It highlights just how deeply AI is starting to intersect with very personal aspects of our lives. So, given all this, can AI actually play a role in helping us improve our human patterns or mitigate negative ones?
It certainly has the potential. AI could serve as that mirror and maybe a coach,
How so?
providing personalized feedback on our cognitive, emotional, behavioral patterns, increasing self-awareness. AI apps can track mood, identify negative thought patterns.
Things we might not notice ourselves.
Exactly. Offering insights. It could also offer coaching tools, helping regulate emotions, modify behaviors, develop healthier coping mechanisms. But
But
remember the limitations in genuine emotional understanding and the risk of over-reliance on these systems.
so AI can be a tool for personal growth, maybe even societal improvement, but it needs to be used thoughtfully, understanding its limits.
Precisely. It's vital to emphasize AI cannot replace human judgment, empathy, or genuine human connection. Its most valuable role is likely augmenting our own capabilities.
You touched earlier on the listener's reflection about life and death. How does the concept of patterns intersect with these fundamental aspects of our existence?
Well, biologically, life is a complex, self-organizing pattern of processes. Death marks the end of those biological patterns in an individual.
But other patterns persist.
Our cognitive and behavioral patterns can have a lasting impact beyond our lifespan through cultural transmission, memories, and others, and now digital footprints. Technologies like grief bots try to interact with these lingering patterns, but again, raise profound ethical questions. While our conscious experience ends with death, the influence of our patterns can persist. How we engage with those echoes, especially with AI's help, needs careful ethical thought.
It really brings home the idea that even after we're gone, the patterns we establish continue to ripple outwards. So how do we navigate this complex labyrinth of human patterns in our own lives? What are some practical steps?
Cultivating self-awareness is the crucial first step. Becoming more conscious of our implicit biases, emotional reactions, habitual behaviors, cultural influences.
How? Mindfulness, reflection.
Practices like mindfulness, self-reflection, journaling, getting feedback can help. Even cautiously using AI feedback tools might offer insights. Secondly, embracing agency and cognitive liberty.
Recognizing we can choose.
Yes, recognizing that despite influences, we have capacity to choose and change. Questioning patterns, setting intentions, using tools, psychological techniques, self-help, maybe AI. Neuroplasticity means change is possible.
And education.
Vital. Fostering pattern literacy from a young age, understanding these forces, developing coping skills, emotional intelligence, critical thinking.
So it's about becoming more conscious of the dance we're in, understanding the steps, and realizing we have some agency in choosing our own moves.
Exactly. And taking a broader perspective, life is this intricate, interconnected dance of patterns. Our individual lives are smaller patterns within that larger whole. While our individual conscious patterns cease, their effects can persist. Ultimately, the human endeavor is largely about understanding ourselves through these patterns and hopefully navigating them with wisdom, compassion, and purpose towards a more fulfilling existence.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the world of human patterns.
Yeah.
Wow. We've seen just how multifaceted they are, shaped by everything from biology to culture, and why understanding them is so crucial for both our personal lives and the broader society. We've also explored the fascinating potential and the very real challenges of using AI to better understand these fundamental aspects of being human.
And perhaps one of the most important things to remember is that these patterns aren't fixed. They're not set in stone.
Right.
Recognizing the influences can empower us to be more intentional about the patterns we cultivate in our own lives and in our communities.
It really makes you think about how these human patterns might continue to evolve as we increasingly interact with intelligent technologies. What new patterns might emerge in this age of AI? And what responsibility do we have in shaping those new patterns? That's certainly something for all of us to consider.
Absolutely. And I would encourage you, the listener, to take some time to observe the patterns in your own life, in your interactions.
Just notice things.
Yeah, notice things. Reflect on how the forces we've discussed today might be influencing them. That initial awareness is often the first step towards greater self-understanding and potentially positive change.
This is DigitView.